Yeah, sure thing. Well, Gemma, you've made a bunch of signings. It's a pretty young Phoenix squad. Was that always the intention that it was going to be such a young team?
Yeah, I think the main makeup was going to be quite young, especially kind of in this lead up to 2023, and kind of giving opportunities to younger players to try and kind of push into progressing on into kind of better things and into international football. We always knew, especially this year with the timing of everything, that the reality was it was probably going to be a pretty young squad. But the makeup of it, to be honest, like even if we didn't have a Phoenix team, like a lot of those girls we would have been trying to get into A-League women's teams anyway because we believe that they were ready. So it's exciting that we've got the opportunity to kind of do it through the Phoenix, really. Yeah,
because does this team have a bit of a long-term kind of look to it as well? Like, I know there's a bunch of 17-year-olds. Have you kind of signed those players in this season thinking, in 2 or 3 years it's kind of, we're not going to really make an impact?
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of not based all around this season, not short term. Like we're thinking longer term development for the players, but also for the team as well. We understand trying to make an impact in the first year with the timeframes that we've got, can be difficult. So we're also thinking longer term as well to see like if we actually nourish these players, look after them through the next couple of years and things. That's when we think we're going to start to see a real big impact.
Yeah, and you've had a little bit of time in Wellington with some of the players. What are the first things you've kind of been working on as a group?
To be honest, especially we had a lot of players that have been in lockdown for about 9 weeks or so it was kind of actually getting them back on the grass, getting rid of the cobwebs and things like that. But now there's a focus on kind of mentally preparing them for what's to come in terms of the expectations of professional football, what they're about to walk into, getting the group together as much as we still don't have access to the Australian players yet. But also physically preparing them as well for what's to come, almost stepping into the start of a pre-season basically.
Is there enough time to get this team ready for round one?
Oh, we think so. Will everything be ticked off and everyone will know exactly the playing model and how we want to play and everything by game one, like inside and out? Maybe not, but like we'll be close.
And I think 5 spots remaining in the squad. What positions are you kind of looking at for those last few players?
We need at least one in every position in terms of defenders, midfielders and attackers, and then we'll probably be looking for kind of an extra hybrid almost, somebody that can play a little bit of a forward and attacking midfield role. But yeah, that's kind of what we're looking for at the moment.
Yeah, just final one before I pass on. There were like a few kind of football firms that have been involved with the Phoenix Academy. They aren't involved in the squad. Are they ones that you did approach the time? Did they kind of decline for other reasons? What was the reason behind that?
Yeah, I think a lot of like time frames and things like that, and also I think with some of the older players as well having full-time jobs and things like that. The reality of what the A-League Women's is at the moment, to try and leave a full-time job for the expectations of kind of a 5-month season is actually quite difficult. So there's some other things at play as well that aren't totally not them wanting to be involved. There's lots of things around that as well, and we understand that.
Obviously the vast majority is pretty young and inexperienced. There's a few girls who are in that under 17 sort of team that did really well a few years back. How much do you lean on them, although they are pretty young, how much do you lean on them through that experience?
Yeah, I think massively, to be honest. We talk about inexperience and them being young, but like you said, like that experience was huge for them. Like they got more international games under their belt, even though it's age group, than a lot of players do. And if we think about the young Australians that are playing in the A-League Women's, like a lot of them don't have exposure to a World Cup like our girls do. So we think in that respect, some of them will actually be more experienced than some of the younger players in Australia in other W League teams. So we'll lean on them quite a bit. They came through a lot of resilience and showed a lot of determination through that campaign. And I think being away from home as well for long periods of time like they did through that, I think they'll be able to tap into that quite a lot.
Leadership-wise, have you, with this young bunch of girls, who sort of stands out to you as someone who's probably going to be the leader?
There's a few people, to be honest. Like at the moment, a couple of the older girls naturally stand up in terms of like Lily, that's had experience through already playing for Perth Glory last year. Chloe stands up quite a lot in terms of her maturity and her experience in the States, in the UK. She's got a lot of background in that space. But then some of our younger players that haven't had that much exposure, like a Kate Taylor and people like that are quite mature for their age and kind of step into those leadership roles as well. So those are the 3 that initially come to mind that are kind of starting to kind of take hold of that, and we'll probably lean on them quite a lot.
Do you think this squad would have looked much different if it wasn't for sort of border restrictions and being able to bring players back from overseas and things?
Potentially a little different. I don't think a lot different. Like if the restrictions weren't there and we could kind of bring people in, maybe 2 or 3 people, but I don't think it would have changed the real shape of our team, to be honest, going into this first year.
And obviously some really young players have had to make a tough call to be away from sort of friends and family for quite some time. What sort of support structures are there in place to sort of help these young players on a lot of them their first professional sort of trip away?
Yeah, it's definitely something we're mindful of. Some of them it's their first time living away from home, and then even having to go into that for like a 6-month period, so to speak. I think the one thing is a lot of them were stepping into that university age anyway, so they were naturally going to be moving away from home potentially anyway. They have good family support around them, but we're also doing due diligence ourselves in terms of looking at a welfare officer on the ground over there in Wollongong that can support with that space. And we've got Helen, who works with the PFA, who's kind of linked in with the Wellington Phoenix as well, that's kind of there for their kind of mental well-being as well. So making sure there's things in place, but also, yeah, some of these girls kind of are chomping at the bit for it and ready for it as well, I think.
You're all enjoying Wellington, are you?
Pardon?
You're all enjoying Wellington, are you?
All enjoying Wellington? Yeah, it's been nice to get out, to be honest. We've had restrictions for a bit, so for the girls to be able to get back on the grass and actually get some training underway and get everyone together, the New Zealand-based players anyway, has been really good.
So you talked about a lot of players have had restrictions on what they can do. So has training been fitness and those sorts of things, or just connecting? What's the
a bit of both, to be honest. There's still a lot of football, but we're kind of doing it in a way that almost shakes a bit of the cobwebs off, puts them under the pump a little bit physically, gets them used to the capacity of what they're being expected for, and there is some running involved as well to try and get them through that as well.
David, any update on sort of the nuts and bolts of being in Australia and that sort of thing?
Yeah, we're working very closely with APL in Australia on the logistics about getting over there. We're looking at early next week leaving Wellington and then relocation. The good thing obviously is not having to quarantine, so we've already got approval from New South Wales Government that we can go straight into Sydney, and then the 2 teams will go to the separate bases. But it's relatively well advanced, and we're hoping just to finalise some of those nuts and bolts and the details in the next couple of days.
So, excuse me, but it said 29th for them then or something, was it? Or that was a while ago. What's their actual date? And
we're looking at probably most likely early next week,
right.
Monday, Tuesday, early next week.
So will the men and women fly out together?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And do you have a home base for both sides yet?
The A-League men's team is looking to base themselves out of a Sydney base, and the women's team were looking to go probably down to Wollongong, although there's still a little bit of work to be done in that space yet, but that's looking like most likely.
Possibly to you, Dave, there are a few one-year deals. What do you talk about long-term and that sort of thing? Do some of the players still have to prove themselves, or is a one-year deal a natural sort of thing for?
Yeah, most A-League women contracts are 1-year contracts, and that's just a flexibility that most of the clubs like to extend. I think for us, the important thing, like Gemma said, is we are definitely building towards 2023. That's huge for us. That's why this particular execution for the Phoenix A-League women's team is a JV almost with New Zealand football. So it's a very, very close relationship that we've built with New Zealand football. And so really it'll be a case of Gemma and New Zealand football and us working together as to how best we can build towards 2023, hence the nature of the contracts.
Is that then the team may look significantly different next season with 2023 in mind?
That's your call.
Potentially, we're agile in that respect, but also knowing that in the build up to 2023, like a lot of the Ferns have good contracts in more extensive leagues that are probably more competitive than the A-League women's. So there would never be any expectation for the nature of those to leave those contracts to come into the A-League women's. So it would still kind of be utilised for those players that we're currently working with, really, that are really based in kind of Australia, New Zealand, and can kind of push for that squad. Having this professional setup allows them to not be just playing domestic football, gives them that level of competition to still kind of push for 2023.
Jim, is that hard for you to juggle? Obviously, New Zealand football are building towards 2023, but you obviously are coach of this team now and you want to win games. How hard is that to juggle, building for the future and, not losing a lot of games this season.
Yeah, definitely. There's a balance, and we've talked about it within the Phoenix and within the staff as well. Like the way I see success will be in two ways, to be honest. It's not just going to be the points on the scoreboard and how many wins we get, how competitive we are. It's also going to be how the players develop when they're with us as well. If the players that stay with us in the environment that they're in, if they walk away after this season and they're better players, they're getting better contract offers from better leagues, or they're stepping into the Matildas or the Ferns and things like that, that's what I deem as success as well. That doesn't mean we're not going to go out there to win and to try and do as well as we can within the competition. I just think the way that we're going to measure success this season will be based on both of those things.
David, do you have an update on Mr. Pennington? Is he in Aussie, or what's he up to?
Oh, if he's not in Australia, he's very, very close. So we've got him in. He with the changes, we've managed to get him in. And we fully expect that he'll be linking up with the team when we get there early next week. In fact, it will be the first time the entire squad is together is when we arrive into City early next week. So Reno will be there, Nicholas Pennington will be there, the new centre back. So it will be a full squad.
So Reno's already in Sydney, or in New South Wales?
I don't know if he's not, he's very close because he was in Victoria.
So you're obviously keen to get to Australia next week, early next week. That's so you can get more or less everyone together and just get straight into it, I'm assuming, and that's the final sort of push to start the season.
Yeah, definitely. Like the biggest challenge in this is almost the makeup of the team. So we've got half a squad here almost starting, but we still got half a squad to come in, and to try and get that. So there's that blend of players, like they come together. It's not like a separation of Australians and Kiwis. It's probably going to be our biggest challenge through this season as well, rather than just the results as well. Is like actually bringing that team together and making them identify as the Phoenix. And that's going to be happening for the first time. So having those like few weeks when we get over there before our first game is going to be key.
I know you've had some young players here, but when you do get them all together, that professionalism of all being together and living and training and all of that sort of thing, how do you expect everyone to cope?
I think, to be honest, they'll do pretty well. I think they've come into this with their eyes open as well in terms of what the expectations are for professional football, especially a lot of the ones that have come through the future Ferns pathway. Because the reality is we look to get them signed contracts, we look to get them into professional football. So they do a lot of work on the expectations of that, and knowing that when you go into your first contract as well, especially if it was in places like Europe and stuff like that, it's not glamorous. You're kind of not on massive money. You're not in the best accommodation in the world and stuff like that. It's not like men's football. So they have a good education and awareness of what they're coming into and what the expectation is for stepping into professional football. So there'll be some adjustment for them, but they kind of know what they're about to face.
Gemma, last season we saw how wild and massive the crowds were when we finally got back to New Zealand. All going well, that happens again. What would it be like for you to walk out, in a double header with the men to that sort of reception of crowd, coaching us like?
Yeah, to be honest, that's what we're all waiting for. This season isn't exactly, if we were going to write exactly what we wanted it to look like, of course we'd want to be here. We'd want to be doing that. COVID brings up circumstances that don't allow for it, but for the players, for us, like being able to come here and be in Wellington and, like you said, double header with the crowds, like that's something that we're all kind of itching for and waiting for. And I mean, even hopeful that maybe if vaccinations and borders go the way we want to, that maybe it could happen at some point this season. We know that's a long shot, but at the same time, like that sort of kind of hope to think that we could be playing in front of those crowds will be massive for the players and for the staff.
Just on double headers, David, is that a possibility that they can do double headers at the same stadium in Aussie, or will it not work like that?
No, that's exactly what we're working on. We expect an updated draw potentially later this week. Not only double headers in Australia, but double headers in New Zealand. So APL has been, and we've been working very closely with them to try and rework the draw so there are as many opportunities to do double headers as we possibly can. And we've said to them, if we do double headers, or we come back, if the A-League men's team can come back to New Zealand, we want to bring the women's team back at the same time and do the double headers wherever we are in New Zealand, Wellington. If we go to Eden Park again, make that work. It's very high on our priority list and we can make it work. We obviously need the draw to work in our favour, we need the borders to open, and then we need the commercial backing as well. And at the moment we're still searching for commercial backing for the A-League women's team. There's a lot of people who have shown interest, but no one's come forward and said we want to sign on the dotted line. And that's I think, disappointing for us as a club, given that going into this, a lot of people said they wanted to be part of it, and when push comes to shove, no one's fronted up yet. And we've spoken to all major corporates, all the banks, all the insurance companies, but we haven't given up, and hopefully soon there will be the corporate support for the women's team as well.
So if it doesn't arrive, sort of the team can't come back during the season, is that sort of what you're saying?
No, but it certainly makes it easier.
So that means no front of shirt sponsor yet?
Not at the moment.
And what about home grounds? Would have any discussions been sort of said about where the teams will be playing their home games across the ditch?
In Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we end up locating to Wollongong, it'll be Wynn Stadium. But like I say, with the A-League Women's, there are opportunities to play at other stadia around Australia as well, with double headers with other A-League Women's team, and we're just investigating that now.
Gemma, when you were putting the squad together, you got your 11 Kiwi spots, were you looking at these are the best 11 players available right now, or were you thinking, some of these are going to be better in 5 years' time, and what was the reason for wanting to bring in younger players?
A bit of both, to be honest. We wanted to balance the makeup. We didn't want it to just be predominantly the players that we're looking at for the next 5 years, let's say. But we also wanted to invest in those players that are kind of looking at football as a career longer term as well. So thinking about 2023, that's been the main focus, those players that are kind of pushing for that in terms of the Kiwi makeup anyway. So we still wanted a balance, a competitive balance, but at the same time for me it was about, this I take women's football seriously, and the amount of investment that's going into it, the game's just going to get bigger. For people to succeed on a world stage or internationally with the Ferns, it's about embracing it as your career and stepping into the professional game and knowing that's what you're going to kind of dedicate your life to be the best you can for as long as you can. So that was a part of it in terms of, we talk about the moving, the relocating, being away for 6 months and stuff like that. That's the reality of professional football in the women's game and in the men's game, really. So it was kind of based off of that as well.
So how many players maybe said no that you had initially approached, whether it was through work or just the relocation and stuff like? Were there quite a few, or is it just kind of one or two?
Nah, not too many, to be honest. It was just probably the Ferns you're thinking of in terms of that are around at the moment, but are kind of in that transition period of full-time work, and it was probably just those couple, to be honest.
And so what are the expectations with such a young group, such a short lead-up period in season one?
We still want to be competitive. The reality is, I'm not going to sit here and say we're going to go and compete to win the league this season with the group that we've got. But I think as well, with a young group like this as well, there's kind of nothing to lose either for them, and everything to gain. So they're going to improve their visibility, they're going to improve their competitive nature and how good they are on the field, just by being involved in this league. So I think there's kind of that, and if you think back to the 17s group that we were talking about earlier, there's nothing expected of you, there's nothing to lose, and you end up coming out and getting a bronze medal just from the fact that you kind of go into it with the naivety of being like, well, what have we got to lose? Let's just go for it. I think it's very similar with this makeup of the team. I don't think it's not going to be challenging. We're going to come up against more experienced players that have been playing together for a long time. Lots of the W League teams this year have kept their core groups, so they're going to be quite well versed in that respect. But I also think that a new group, we're very unknown. That gives us a competitive advantage straight away. So yeah, I think we're still going to try and be competitive, but I think we'll know kind of after the first couple of games where we're going to be competing, and if we've got a shot, or if it's going to be competing for more of development for players and showing them what it's like to kind of have your backs against the wall, so to speak.
Yeah, because there would have been many players in the past that have finished their whole careers without being able to play professional football, here in New Zealand or Australia. For the likes of, Kate and Zoe out of Christchurch, they're 17. What does that opportunity mean for, for young players like that, and they perhaps probably don't realise how lucky they are to have a professional team as early or as young as they are?
Yeah, I'm not sure they do, to be honest. But I think it just, the visibility that it creates, the pathway, this is what's been missing in New Zealand, to really inspire players to actually want to commit to football. I think that's really hard when you can't see a tangible outcome. Whereas now to see players that are probably not that much older than them now stepping into the professional realms of football, like I think it's going to create a big shift in the women's pathway in New Zealand, and how seriously people take it or how much they commit to it, because all of a sudden it's a reality. I don't think they've had that in the past. I think they've seen the Ferns, but they don't see much of their professional careers because of the visibility in New Zealand or the exposure in terms of TV when the games are played, things like that. They don't see a lot of that, whereas this and the exposure that the A-League Women's brings in terms of the Phoenix is way bigger.
And what does this mean for New Zealand football's development, that you've got an entire 11 Kiwi players? I think one of them has played in this league before. What does it do for the development of the women's game, having so many players getting that opportunity to play in the A-League?
I think it shifts it massively. And I think, like, for the Ferns, even with Yitka coming in, and we can see what she's doing in Canada at the moment in terms of the players that she's working with, giving younger players opportunities. I think for the Ferns in general, for New Zealand football in general, like having these sorts of players and now another 10 players stepping into professional football only makes things more competitive. And I think for the nature of the Ferns and everything else, if you feel like you've got players coming through, you've got that pathway, you've got that competitive edge, it starts to really kind of generate how competitive we can be. And I think in the past we have been able to compete, and we've been in the top 20 before and things like that in the world stage. But since the investment in the game and around the rest of the world in the professional leagues, like, we're starting to slip. Whereas I think this provides an opportunity to still hang on, still push, still grip to that top 20 and start to work our way back in, because we're starting to produce this pathway where 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19, 20 are getting this opportunity in the professional realms. And hopefully we talk about longer term, we want to invest in these players, but you're hoping that also once they get to a certain space within the Phoenix, they're getting snapped up by, the WSL or something, and Everton comes calling, or people like that, Like, this team is massive for that in terms of building exposure for the players, for the team. Like, we want to be competitive. We also want to be a team where people are going to want to come and play for us. And I think what that provides for New Zealand football is actually huge, and it's what we've been waiting for, to be honest.
Yeah, will this team always have that kind of development look to it, or is that going to be just quite unique given the short lead up?
I think it's unique at the moment. I think there'll always be a youth side to it, but I don't think it'll be the whole makeup of the team like we're seeing for this year. I think there'll be more experienced players. I think there'll be a bit of a mix moving forwards, and I think the team will probably be a lot more competitive, looking for more goals towards playoffs and finals and things like that. So I think it's just the makeup for now in terms of that partnership and that reach towards 2023. But I do think it'll still be, same as it is for the men, really, a pathway for players to come out of New Zealand and get their first professional contracts.
Because the Australian, well, you've got a couple of Australian players, they're quite young as well. Is that a case of, most of the other teams have kind of got their squads already sorted, so you're kind of looking at, the next tier of players that are kind of knocking on the door? And why haven't there, I guess, been kind of older players, I suppose, that, might have been looking for the opportunity as well?
A bit of both. So, I'm not going to lie about the fact that, like, we're last off the mark. Do you know what I mean? So, the fact of the matter is, a lot of the A-League women's squads signed, sealed, delivered, so to speak, minus maybe a couple of train-ons and things like that. So, we are coming late in the piece. There's no doubt about that. So that does mean you're working with what's left. But saying that, we've kind of embraced the nature of what I talked about in terms of, well, if we're kind of going to have a young makeup of a team, like, let's get these players that are good enough to compete right now, but probably just haven't necessarily been given the opportunities, or have been in W League sides but haven't necessarily got the minutes because they've got more experienced players ahead of them. I think embracing that and utilising that this season, like, goes to our favour as well, and keeps that mix of players and that group and that dynamic, like, it works quite well. So I think that's kind of been the nature of it, to be honest. And also some of the players that we're signing, like even like a Kush LaRue, for instance, like she'll be a future Matilda. Like, she's already tagged for it, people are already excited about her. So that might be like, oh, that's an 18-year-old, but she's going to be a real exciting player and somebody to watch. And probably like some W League women's teams might be like kicking themselves that they haven't snapped her up necessarily. So we're quite confident about the players that we're picking. I think people can look at them and see young and inexperienced. But also sometimes that produces a drive and kind of a naivety and a will to think that anything's not impossible, and we'll embrace that as well.